The room was silent in a way that made every breath feel too loud. The lawyer cleared his throat, unfolded the papers, and began reading the will, but no one was really listening to the words. All eyes were on the widow, sitting stiffly at the head of the table, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She stared straight ahead, her face calm, almost rehearsed, as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows, and inside, something far heavier than grief hung in the air. In the corner of the room stood Mira, the maid. She had worked in this house for over a decade, quietly cleaning floors, washing dishes, and watching a family that never quite felt like one. She knew the house better than anyone else. The creaking steps on the staircase, the door that never fully closed, the faint smell of dampness that came from below. She had always told herself it was none of her business. After all, she was just a maid. But as the will reading went on, Mira felt a strange unease settle deep in her chest. The widow had always been polite to her, never unkind, but distant in a way that felt deliberate. There were rooms Mira was never allowed to enter, questions she was never meant to ask. The basement was one of them. The door stayed locked at all times, and whenever Mira cleaned nearby, the widow would appear suddenly, watching her with sharp, silent eyes until she moved away. Over the years, Mira had learned to ignore the faint sounds that sometimes drifted up from below, soft thuds, a muffled scrape, telling herself it was just the house settling, just old pipes, just her imagination. As the lawyer continued reading, the word inheritance echoed through the room. Names were listed, assets divided, and still the widow showed no emotion. But then the lawyer paused, his brow furrowing slightly as he adjusted his glasses. He reread a line, slower this time, his voice careful. Something about a trust. Something about a responsibility kept hidden until the proper time. Mira felt her heart begin to pound. Without meaning to, her eyes drifted toward the hallway that led to the basement. A memory flashed through her mind, a night months ago when she had heard a soft cry, unmistakably human, coming from behind that locked door. A child's cry. She had stood frozen, her hand hovering over the light switch, before fear convinced her to walk away. Now, as the widow shifted in her seat for the first time, Mira knew she could no longer pretend she hadn't heard it. The lawyer kept reading, but the words blurred together. Mira took a small step forward, her pulse racing, her thoughts screaming that this was not just about money or will reading anymore. This was about a secret buried deep within the house, a secret the widow had guarded at all costs. And as Mira glanced once more toward the basement door, she realized the truth was closer than ever to being uncovered, whether the widow was ready for it or not. Mira steadied herself and stayed where she was, pretending to smooth a wrinkle in the tablecloth. The widow's eyes flicked toward her for just a second, sharp and warning, before returning to the lawyer. That look alone told Mira she was right to be afraid. This was not just a family secret or an awkward truth meant to stay buried. Whatever lay behind that basement door had been protected with intention, and the widow was prepared to defend it. Years earlier, when Mira first came to work in the house, she remembered hearing laughter, a child's laughter. It had surprised her then, because everyone in town said the widow had no children. The sound had come from somewhere below, faint but real. When Mira asked casually if relatives were visiting, the widow had smiled tightly and said the house often echoed strangely. After that, the laughter stopped, or maybe Mira stopped listening. Life had taught her that asking the wrong questions could cost a job, and jobs were not easy to find. The lawyer's voice droned on, listing properties and accounts, but each word seemed to circle back to the same strange phrases. Care, maintenance, restricted access. The widow shifted again, her fingers now trembling despite her effort to stay composed. One of the distant relatives at the table frowned, sensing something odd but unable to name it. The tension thickened, pressing on everyone's chest like the air before a storm. Myra's thoughts wandered to the basement itself. She had only been down there once years ago, when the lock was accidentally left open. The stairs were steep, the light dim, and the smell heavy and cold. She remembered stopping halfway down, struck by a sudden feeling that she was being watched. Before she could take another step, the widow had appeared at the top of the stairs, her voice calm but firm, telling Mira she was not needed there. The lock had clicked shut moments later, sealing the memory away. Now, sitting in that formal living room during the will reading, Mira wondered how many lies had been told to keep that door closed. The widow had lost her husband under quiet circumstances, too quiet for a family with such wealth. There had been no funeral open to the public, no long mourning period, just a swift return to routine, as if grief itself had been managed like an account balance. People in town whispered, but no one ever dared to accuse her of anything. As the lawyer paused to sip water, the silence stretched. Mira noticed something she had never seen before, a faint bruise at the widow's wrist, half hidden by her sleeve. It was small, but unsettled her deeply. The image of a child, growing older in darkness, pressed into her mind, though she had no proof, only fear and fragments of memory. The will reading continued, but Mira felt a quiet shift within herself. She was no longer just a maid standing in the background. She was a witness to something that had gone on far too long. Whatever the widow was hiding, whatever secret was locked in the basement, it was tied to this will, to this moment. And as Mira listened carefully, she sensed that one wrong word, one unexpected question, could crack the silence wide open and change every life in that room forever. The will reading finally came to an uneasy pause, and the lawyer announced a short break. Chairs scraped softly as people stood, murmuring to one another in low voices. Some looked confused, others curious, but no one spoke openly. The widow remained seated, staring at the papers in front of her as if they might suddenly betray her. Mira watched her closely, noticing how her shoulders stayed tense, how she never once looked toward the hallway. It was as if acknowledging that direction would make everything fall apart. In the kitchen, the relatives whispered among themselves. One of them mentioned the strange wording in the will, wondering aloud why certain parts of the house were excluded from inheritance. Another joked nervously about hidden rooms and old secrets, laughing too loudly to mask his discomfort. Mira poured tea with steady hands, though her mind raced. She realized that others were starting to sense it too. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and it was tied to the widow's silence. From the back of the house, old Mrs. Calder, a distant aunt, sat alone by the window. She had been quiet the entire morning, her eyes cloudy but alert. Mira remembered that Mrs. Calder used to visit often years ago, bringing small gifts and asking strange questions about the basement that were quickly shut down. Now, as Mira passed by, the old woman caught her wrist gently. Her grip was weak, but her voice was clear. "Some doors are locked because someone is afraid of what will come out," she whispered. Then she let go, as if she had said too much. Those words stayed with Mira as she returned to the living room. The lawyer resumed reading, his tone careful, almost guarded. He mentioned instructions that were not to be disclosed publicly, conditions that had to be met before certain truths could be addressed. The widow nodded stiffly at each line, but her calm was cracking. A bead of sweat rolled down her temple, and she wiped it away quickly, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. Mira felt torn between fear and responsibility. She thought of the long nights she had spent in that house, the sounds she could never fully explain, the way the widow always insisted on personally handling anything related to the basement. She wondered how a secret like this could survive for so long without someone stepping forward. Maybe everyone had seen pieces of it, but no one had seen enough to speak. As the afternoon light faded, shadows stretched across the room, making the house feel even older, heavier. Myra's gaze drifted once more to the hallway. She imagined what it would be like to unlock that door, to finally understand the truth behind the whispers and the will. But she also knew that doing so could destroy lives, including her own. Across the room, the widow suddenly stood, interrupting the lawyer mid-sentence. Her voice was polite, but strained as she suggested ending the reading for the day. No one argued. As people began gathering their coats, Mira felt the tension tighten instead of easing. The secret had not been revealed, but it had been stirred awake. And now, with too many eyes watching and too many questions forming, the widow's carefully built silence was beginning to crack. Night fell quickly over the house, as if the sky itself wanted to hide what was coming. Most of the relatives left, their cars disappearing down the long driveway. But the tension did not leave with them. It settled deeper into the walls. The widow insisted that Mira stay the night. her voice calm, but leaving no room for refusal. Mira agreed, though a knot tightened in her stomach. Being alone in a house, after everything that had been said, felt like stepping into a trap she could no longer avoid. The lawyer had gone as well, but not before giving the widow a long, searching look. He packed his briefcase slowly, reminding her that certain conditions in the will would require follow-up. His words hung between them, unspoken questions wrapped in polite language. Once the door closed behind him, the house felt strangely hollow, every sound louder than it should have been. Mira moved quietly through her evening tasks, wiping already clean surfaces, straightening objects that did not need fixing. The widow remained in the living room, staring at the fireplace without lighting it. At one point, she stood and walked toward the hallway, then stopped as if something pulled her back. Her hand trembled when she pressed against the wall, and for a brief moment, her composed mask slipped, revealing fear and exhaustion beneath. Later, as Mira climbed the stairs to her small room, she heard it again, a sound she had tried to forget. Soft, rhythmic, almost like someone knocking from the inside. It came from below. Mira froze, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might give her away. The sound stopped just as suddenly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than noise. She sat on the edge of her bed, debating with herself. Every instinct told her to stay put, to survive the night and leave the next morning. But another thought kept pushing forward. If she walked away now, whatever was hidden in that basement might never see the light. The will reading had cracked the door open just enough. Maybe this was the moment it would finally break. Downstairs, the widow moved as well. Mira heard slow footsteps, then the faint jingle of keys. The sound made her breath catch. Keys meant choices. Keys meant doors could open or stay closed forever. Mira quietly left her room and stood at the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. The widow stopped at the basement door. She stood there for a long time, her back to the stairs, as if sensing she was not alone. Her shoulders rose and fell with each shaky breath. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with a voice filled with warning and regret. "Some things are meant to stay hidden," she said into the quiet. Mira took a single step forward, the floorboard creaking beneath her foot. The widow stiffened. Slowly, she turned, their eyes meeting across the dim hallway. Between them stood the locked basement door, the will's unspoken truths, and a secret that had waited far too long. The key trembled in the widow's hand as both women realized a moment they had feared was finally here. The widow didn't shout or run. Instead, she lowered the key slowly, her eyes never leaving Myra's face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house seemed to hold its breath with them. Then the widow did something unexpected. She slid the key into her pocket and shook her head, not in anger, but in quiet desperation. "You don't understand," she said softly. "If that door opens tonight, there's no closing it again." Before Mira could respond, a sharp sound cut through the hallway. The doorbell. Both women flinched. At this hour, no one ever came. The widow's face drained of color as the bell rang again, longer this time. Mira felt a chill crawl up her spine. The will reading, the strange clauses, the warnings, it all suddenly felt connected to this moment. The widow moved first, straightening her posture as if putting on armor. She walked toward the front door, while Mira followed at a distance. When the door opened, a man stood on the porch, rain-soaked and tense. He introduced himself as a social worker, his voice professional but urgent. He explained an anonymous report had been filed earlier that evening, raising concerns about the house and someone who might be living there unseen. Myra's heart sank. Someone else knew. This was bigger than just her suspicions now. The widow tried to protest, insisting there was a mistake, that the house had been searched before, that rumors had gone too far. But the man listened carefully, his eyes drifting past her into the dark hallway, lingering just a second too long near the basement door. As the conversation stretched on, Mira noticed movement behind the social worker. A familiar figure stepped into the porch light, Mrs. Calder. The old woman's hands trembled, but her gaze was steady. "I couldn't stay quiet anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I helped keep the secret once. I won't do it again." The widow turned sharply, betrayal flashing across her face. "You promised," she whispered. Mrs. Calder shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I promised out of fear, not love." Inside the house, a low sound echoed through the floorboards. Louder this time. Impossible to ignore. The social worker stiffened, his professional calm cracking. He asked, gently but firmly, about the basement. The widow backed away, pressed between the truth and the walls she had built to contain it. Mira realized then that the will was never just about inheritance. It was a countdown, a final chance of the widow to decide how the story would end. Keys, witnesses, and time were all slipping out of her control. As thunder rolled outside and the sound below grew clearer, Mira understood that whatever was locked in the basement was no longer waiting patiently. The secret was pushing back, and it was about to force its way into the open. The sound from beneath the floor grew stronger, steady and undeniable, until there was no room left for excuses. The social worker stepped fully inside, his voice firm now, no longer asking, but stating what needed to happen. The widow's resistance collapsed in slow motion. Her shoulders sagged, and the key slipped from her trembling hand, hitting the floor with sharp metallic echo that felt louder than any scream. Mira moved first. She picked up the key and held it out, her hand shaking but her resolve steady. The widow looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time there was no control left in her eyes, only fear and a deep, tired sorrow. "I was trying to protect him," she whispered, "from the world, from his father, from everything that would have destroyed him." Her words fell apart as soon as they left her mouth, because everyone in the room understood that protection had crossed into something else long ago. The basement door opened with a long, painful creak. Cold air rushed up the stairs, carrying the smell of damp stone and years of silence. The light flickered on, revealing a small, clean room, not dark, not filthy, but unmistakably sealed off from life. And there, standing near the wall, was a young man, thin, pale, his eyes adjusting slowly to the light. He did not look frightened. He looked prepared, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The widow took a step toward him, her voice breaking as she said his name. "Elias." The name seemed to unlock something in him. He looked past her, straight at Mira, then at Mrs. Calder, then at the social worker. His gaze was calm, almost knowing. "It's time," he said quietly. "I told you it would happen." The truth spilled out quickly then, faster than anyone expected. Elias had not been hidden because he was weak, but because he was considered dangerous. To the family's image, to the inheritance, to the secrets his father had left behind. The will was designed not to pass down money, but responsibility. Elias was a rightful heir, the one person who knew where everything was buried, documents, accounts, truths that could bring powerful people down. Keeping him hidden was never just fear. It was control. As authority stepped in and the widow was led away, Mira felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The house, once heavy with silence, felt lighter already. Elias paused at the foot of the stairs, looking around as if memorizing freedom for the first time. He thanked Mira softly, a simple word that carried years of meaning. But just as the night seemed to settle, the social worker received a call. His face tightened as he listened. He looked at Elias, then at the house. "There's something else," he said slowly. "Your name came up in another file, one that was supposed to stay sealed." Elias met his gaze without surprise. "I know," he replied. "That's only the first door." Mira felt a chill as she realized the secret uncovered tonight was not the end, but the beginning of something far larger. Proof that the widow's secret was only one piece of story still waiting to be told. Morning arrived slowly, as if the house itself needed time to accept what had happened. Sunlight crept through the tall windows, touching corners that had been dark for years. The basement door remained open now, no longer a boundary, but a passage. Elias sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket someone had found for him. He looked older in the daylight, not fragile, just quiet, like someone who had learned patience the hard way. The authorities returned later that morning, careful and calm. They spoke to Elias with respect, explaining his rights, listening as he filled in the missing pieces of his life. He told them how his mother had convinced herself she was protecting him, how fear slowly turned into control, and how the will was meant to decide his fate without ever letting him choose. Mrs. Calder confirmed what she knew, her voice heavy with regret. She admitted she had helped keep the secret years ago, believing the widow's story, and had lived with that guilt ever since. The widow's fate was decided quietly, without drama. She did not fight it. As she was taken away, she looked back at the house one last time, then at Elias. There were tears in her eyes, but also relief, as if the truth had finally lifted a weight she could no longer carry. Elias watched her go, his face unreadable, but his hands steady. Some wounds, Mira realized, did not heal with anger or forgiveness alone. They healed with truth. The will was revised in the days that followed. The hidden clauses were made clear, the sealed documents opened. Elias was named the rightful heir, not just to the property, but to the responsibility of deciding what to do with it. He chose not to keep the house. "It's full of echoes," he said simply. Instead, he planned to sell it and use part of the inheritance to fund support programs for people who had been hidden away, silenced, or controlled by those meant to protect them. Mira stayed on until the house was emptied. On her last day, she walked through each room slowly, remembering who she had been when she first arrived. A maid who kept her head down. A woman who told herself it was safer not to know. Before leaving, Elias thanked her again. "You saw me before anyone else did," he said. "That matters." As Mira stepped outside for the final time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. The mystery that had haunted the house was gone. The secret locked in the basement had been brought into the light, where it could no longer cause harm. The will reading that began as a formal event had become a turning point, not just for one family, but for everyone involved. In the end, the story was not only about inheritance or a hidden son or a widow's secret. It was about what happens when silence is challenged, when ordinary people choose courage over comfort. Mira walked away knowing one simple truth. Secrets survive in the dark, but they rarely survive being seen. And sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is open a door they were told never to touch.